1. Please be aware, while the following story contains no reference to animal cruelty, it does, however, involve cat death. I was inspired to recount this after reading another post that referred to cats as spirit protectors. I'd never heard that before, and it sent chills down my spine. I always knew my old house was haunted, but the story got much creepier after reading that. So here we go. My wife and I were living in an apartment, and my great-aunt was looking to sell her home. The house was built in the 50s and needed some work, and my aunt didn't feel like taking care of it, so she suggested she take the apartment, and we buy the house. It was 2005, and the market was going nuts, so it worked out for everyone. We got a fixer-upper for a fair price, and she got an apartment without the hassle. The house was always full of people. We had friends live with us for a while, then my brother, then we had kids. And when we first moved, we had 2 cats. Not long after the move, our younger cat got very, very ornery. He was constantly hissing, refused to use the litter box, scratching at everyone. That was not him, though. In the apartment, he would cuddle on the back of my neck while I watched TV and purred constantly. I didn't even know he could hiss until we moved. So after ruining our second load of laundry by urinating in it, we decided maybe he just needed to stretch his legs and explore outside. The very first night we let him out, he failed to come back in. We shook treats, put out food, nothing. By 10 p.m. I went out to look for him. My heart broke when I found him just outside the window of a spare room. No signs of trauma, just dead. I sadly buried the cat by an old tree, feeling totally guilty that I didn't do more for him. I feel even worse now after reading the aforementioned paranormal post. After the cat passed, I started sleepwalking. Actually opened up the basement door and fell down a flight of stairs. That sucked. Tried walking out of the house in the middle of a New England winter, and was luckily stopped by my wife. Every once in a while I'd get creeped or hear a strange sound, but it was nothing really noteworthy, and could be explained as someone else making noise. My wife would hear voices. My son, who was 2 or 3 at the time, and has 2 older siblings, started waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning crying. It should be noted that his bedroom was the old spare, the one with the window I found my cat under. Our other cat would go into this room and stare at the top corner of his wall. The dogs would growl outside the door but not enter. All pretty explainable. My wife was getting nervous, but I just laughed it off. We live close to the neighbors. My son's hitting a developmental milestone. Maybe squirrels are getting into the attic. My great-aunt passed away a few years after our owning the house, and shortly after, our first cat got very ill. He started peeing everywhere, just like our second, and later died of CHF. That's when things went from weird to scary. We were watching my brother's son one day. I hear giggling in my son's room. It's my nephew. I walk in, and he is pointing at the corner the cat used to stare. Just creepy giggling. My son started saying things like, "I don't want to go to bed, he gets mad," or "the shadow went over there." I still laughed it off, out loud, but was getting creeped out. That uneasy someone's here feeling kept hitting harder and harder. Then 3 a.m. stuff. Super cliché. But hand to God, I have never heard of the witching hour until I started talking to guys at work. That's how creeped out I was getting. I told people about this craziness. I'd wake up in a cold sweat. No big deal, though falling back to sleep was tough because I felt like someone was watching. Then, for absolutely no reason, at 3:01, my smoke detector starts going off. Fire, fire, fire. It goes off 3 times, then stops. Check the house. Nothing. Check the batteries and go back to bed. The next morning, 3:01, fire, 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 goes off 3 times, then stops. I get up again. Nothing. After the 4th night, I'm totally spooked. Then, inexplicably, it stops. We ended up moving shortly after. It was our dream to move north. and plans were in motion before things got too wild, but the timing really worked for us. We moved into an 1850s farmhouse. I felt safer. No creepy feelings. The kids are sleeping better. I've even stopped sleepwalking. As a side note, the people that bought our house never even moved in. They put the house back on the market, where it sat for almost a year. Creepy. 2. I just want honest thoughts. I moved into this house a little over 3 years ago with my family. No one else has told me about any paranormal experiences. But my parents also waited until we moved out of the old house we lived in for 17 years to tell that they did experience some weird stuff that couldn't be explained. Maybe like a year or so after living here, I woke up in the middle of the night to what I thought was my brother coming in my room. He used to do that often. I kept asking what he wanted. He just kept getting closer to me, then I finally turned a light on. And the weird shadow disappeared. I know sometimes when we're tired and we're just waking up, we can see things that aren't there, but I was genuinely so shook up about that. I made my brother come sleep next to me in the living room for a few days. About 6 months after that, my neighbor took his wife's life, and then his. I know she was really sick, and it was probably really upsetting to see her get worse and worse. Not that it justifies murder, but I try to understand. The day after that, my friend came over to my house whilst I wasn't home. They waited for me, but they told me they felt this horrible feeling driving down my street. And after a couple of minutes, they saw something that looked like a big shadow out of their rear view window. They got so scared they just left after that. I told them something happened to my neighbors, but I didn't tell them what happened. A couple months after that, we were watching a friend's dog. She's a small dog, but she's protective. When she hears the door, she barks. I was home alone one day and sitting in the front room, right in front of the door. I was just sitting on the floor, petting the dogs, when I heard and saw the door being shaken. I have not ever heard the wind do that, and it wasn't a windy day. There are big windows in the front room, so you can see if someone was there. The dogs went crazy. My pit bull, that never barks at anything, started growling and barking. Just to make sure, I got up and looked. I also live on a private road on multiple acres. No one hardly ever comes down here. I didn't see anyone or anything. Those are really the only big scary things that have happened, other than things randomly falling or curtains moving with no heat or AC on. But I feel like those could be justified. One minor thing that has been happening to me lately is really creepy dreams. I would just like to say that I am not really scared of ghosts. I don't think about paranormal stuff often. My first dream, long story short, a ghost tried to strangle me. It felt like a minute in my dream, and then I woke up gasping for air. I tried to justify it, thinking maybe I just stopped breathing in my sleep for a few seconds. The second one, my house was super haunted. The ghost kept trying to scare me out of the house. The third one, a ghost tried to strangle me again, and I kept telling my family something was trying to hurt me, but no one would believe me. My fourth one was not exactly paranormal related, but someone locked me in a house and lit it on fire. It was kind of scary. I had no way out. This has all happened in the past 2 weeks. I forgot, I've also been having lucid dreams lately. I've never in my 20 years of life had a lucid dream, or tried to control my dreams. I know that an older lady and her husband lived here before us. I know she passed at a hospital or nursing home, but I don't know about her husband. There was an agreement that they couldn't tell us the history of the house. Same with the one next door where the murder-suicide happened. I feel like my new neighbors probably know what happened, but I know none of us are about to go up to them and be like, "Hey, did you know someone was murdered in the new house you bought?" Do you think there could be something here? I do sometimes feel like I'm being watched, but I try not to think about it. 3. So I've told a lot of people in my life about this, usually only people close to me, because it makes me seem foolish with how cliché it sounds. But I've never properly written down the whole story. About 9 years ago, I lived in an apartment in a tourist town in Colorado. Kind of an old miners' town that is popular both with the locals of the nearby city and tourists. It sits in a nice valley at the base of a popular mountain with a lovely little downtown, and is just an overall delightful place to live. The apartment was the main floor of an old building with about 4 units in the main building. According to Google, it was built in 1909. It wasn't in the best shape and wasn't one of the pretty Victorian buildings also around. But it was an affordable way to live in a lovely town. The unit itself was pretty odd. I think more so than the other ones in the building. It had an ancient brick fireplace that didn't work because the chimney was removed to build above it, and had wood paneling on the walls. The weirdest part for sure was that in the kitchen, in between the fridge and the shelving, was a door in the wood paneling. It was just a cutout in the paneling itself, so it wasn't apparent unless you were looking for it, being it had no knob, and instead had only a latch for a padlock. You had to set up to go inside, and then inside was a dirt floor and unfinished brick walls, and just wood beams on the ceiling. It sloped gradually upwards towards the back, so if you wanted to get to the very back, you'd have to crawl on your stomach in the dirt. Yeah, I never did that. There was a bare light bulb on the ceiling with a switch, but the back stayed dark. But the way the room was in the middle of the whole house, it seemed like a cellar or basement or something, but it sloped upwards towards the middle of the house. Just weird. We used it for storage, but for the most part avoided it because it was so odd. We found a few animal bones and straps hanging from the pipes inside, like something had been tied up. Also found a few newspapers from the 60s, and even a few old kids' drawings. Let me say first of all that I'm typically a skeptic, until given proof that it can't be explained any other way. I've been fascinated by the paranormal most of my life, but nearly all the evidence I've ever seen for most paranormal things seems easily dismissible with other explanations. My mom and I used to stay overnight at an authentic haunted house every Halloween for years when I was a kid, and I never saw anything compelling no matter how much I wanted to. So the apartment was technically 2-bedroom, but both bedrooms were teeny tiny, and you had to go through one to get to the other. So my roommate ended up preferring to sleep on the couch. This didn't bother me, and worked out fine for us, because we were really close. I can't remember the exact order of things that happened, but most of it focused on her. She woke up with 3 scratches on her back a couple of times. Often she would get them on her arms when she would reach down to get something off the floor in front of the couch. Once it happened to me. I was sitting on the couch and went to move to sit in the chair across from it while I talked to my roommate. It was summer, so I was in shorts. I sit with my legs up on the seat, usually, so I moved and pulled my legs up when I felt a burning on the back of my calf. I had 3 scratches on my calf that were bleeding slightly. I had only moved a couple of feet and didn't feel anything before that. The scratches were fresh. This only ever happened near the couch. There was activity in the kitchen where the strange room was. My roommate would regularly hear footsteps in the kitchen when she was falling asleep. I brushed it off as just her dreaming or hearing the neighbors or the house creaking. But I heard it once when we were up late talking. I asked, "What the hell is that?" genuinely afraid. She said it was what she was talking about, and that she heard it most nights. It was definitely in the kitchen and was unmistakable footsteps. I never heard it any other time. My roommate also couldn't use the kitchen light. This is a weird one. She offhandedly mentioned that the ceiling light in the kitchen didn't work. I was confused and asked if the bulb went out, and she said, "No, it's never worked." Like it was obvious. I got up to show her and turned it on. It went on fine. A little later, we were talking about it and she went to flip it on, and it didn't work. I got up to see, and no joke, when she turned around to face me, I told her it went off again as she turned back towards it. Problems with other electronics also happened pretty often. My roommate had been vegan pretty much her whole life because she doesn't really like meat. She would even take the hot dogs out of Pigs in Blanket when she was a kid. One week, she started craving red meat. We were buying package after package of roast beef deli meat, and she ate straight out of the bag. This one could potentially have been a hormone thing or something, but it was definitely weird. Never happened again. We both struggle with anxiety and depression, but hers got significantly more severe as well. She slept a lot and had trouble working. This wasn't exactly a new problem for her, but it definitely got worse. I do tarot readings for myself, for clarity. Yes, I'm a skeptic by default, but I've been doing tarot since I was a kid, and it always worked for me, so I use it even if I don't know why it works. And one time I did a reading for another friend that was visiting. As I was laying out the cards, I suddenly got really emotional and upset. Looking at the cards and how I was feeling, I just remember thinking, this wasn't a reading for my friend anymore. Without looking at the cards any further, I immediately stopped and put the cards away. I felt like something had invaded my body, and tried to use my cards to communicate. It was a horrible feeling that has never happened in the decades I've been doing tarot again. Things got worse when we were working on moving out. I mean, it just seemed like we kept hitting roadblocks. We couldn't seem to get everything done in time. And we were rushing like crazy. My mom was helping us. She's an alcoholic. But her drinking became constant, and fighting with her became out of control. We couldn't get a handle on anything. About a week before we had to move out, my landlady called me. This was the worst thing that happened, and the thing that sounds most like a cliché horror movie. The voice on the other end was male and very deep. It was talking very angrily in another language, but not one I could recognize. Like not even Latin or anything like in movies. Totally bizarre sounding. And it went on. It got faster and angrier. At this point I was scared, and my roommate was looking at me, and I could tell she knew what was happening, because she looked horrified just from looking at my face. I think I was covering my mouth from fear. At the end, it just turned into a loud growl that got louder and louder before it cut off. I think I started crying. My landlady called back and apologized, saying she was driving through a tunnel. After I left, I had a few people tell me that they heard that town used to have a history of occult and satanic behavior. Which honestly wouldn't surprise me, because it's a bit of a hippie town, and there's a thin line between your average hippie occult crystals and tarot stuff, and fucking with shit you shouldn't be. Basically, I think whatever we were dealing with was not something that had died, or just leftover energy of some kind. I think it was something that had been invited into the house sometime in the past. It seemed to be consciously reacting to us, and targeting my roommate intelligently. I found out afterwards that 3 scratches are supposedly a demon thing. I'm not Christian, so I still scoff at the mocking the Holy Trinity idea of it. But this definitely didn't feel like something that was natural to this realm. I've also heard that they can utilize energy from electricity to drain people and such. It felt like something that both functioned on instinct, but also was more intelligent and powerful than us by far. It did feel like being laughed at by something that looked down on us. The whole experience changed my thoughts on a lot of things, and made me a little less quick to assume something to be complete bullshit, just because there's no compelling physical evidence. I have no evidence either, and I don't think I could have gotten it if I tried. As I said, this thing was smarter than us, and probably wants people to underestimate it. 4. I've never considered myself a believer in the supernatural, but in recent months I've been having some strange experiences. They are difficult for me to explain. Honestly, I fear I may be going insane. Perhaps I should start at the beginning. I was in a relationship with a beautiful young woman named Vanessa. We were very close, and I truly thought she would be the one. Then, 6 years ago, she was killed in a drunk driving incident. Her death devastated me to the core, and for the next couple of years, I completely shut down emotionally, especially around the opposite sex. Eventually, I met another young woman named Jennifer. We seemed to hit it off well, and she helped me to climb out of my self-imposed shell and open up again. In time, I fell in love with her, and I wanted to take the next step. But I was still haunted by the loss of Vanessa, and I feared I may lose Jennifer the same way. The one night, I had a dream about Vanessa. In the dream, we were sitting down on my living room couch, just shooting the breeze. It all seemed so real. "I've missed you so much," I said. "I know, I've missed you too," she replied. "Life just hasn't been the same without you. I'm still finding it difficult to move on." "Have you found another woman?" she asked. I'm not sure I want to talk about it." "You have found someone, haven't you?" She didn't sound upset, just curious. I sighed in defeat. "Yeah, I guess you could say I have. No question I've fallen for her, but what?" "I don't wish to betray your memory," I said while barely holding back tears. She smiled and held my hand. "My time in that world is over. Although I cherished our time together, I don't want you to remain in grief and agony forever. Not even for me. She will make you happy. Don't be afraid to start over." I opened my mouth to say more, but that's when I woke up. I spent the next day or so pondering what I had gone over with myself and my subconscious. Perhaps it was time to start over. I confessed my feelings to Jennifer, and much to my delight, she reciprocated. Eventually we married, and I had fathered twin boys. And that's when things began to get weird. It happened one night when my twins were 2. I was in the living room playing with them after a long day at work, while Jennifer, who was an excellent cook, was in the kitchen fixing our favorite dish. It started out normal enough, like any other night. Then I could have sworn I heard a voice say, "Alarm malfunction." I looked up at the sound of the voice. "Did you say something, honey?" "No." I could have sworn I heard something. I didn't hear anything. I shrugged it off and went back to entertaining my sons. A few minutes passed and I heard it again. "Alarm malfunction." There it goes again. "What was that, sweetie?" "Didn't hear it." "It said alarm malfunction." "I haven't heard a thing, dear." An awkward silence ensued. Then that voice came again. "Alarm malfunction." For reasons I can't explain, I somehow felt compelled to obey this odd voice. I got up from the living room and walked toward our burglar alarm in the hallway. Lo and behold, the machine was indeed malfunctioning. Fortunately, I am a decent mechanic, and I was able to fix it in a few minutes. Then I had a pleasant dinner with Jennifer and the boys. That night we woke up to the sound of an alarm blaring. Someone had broken into the house. Whoever it was, they were not deterred by the burglar alarm because we could hear them roaming around downstairs. My wife and sons hid in our bathroom, while I pulled my 12-gauge shotgun out of the closet. I opened the bedroom door and I saw a man dressed in black ascend the staircase. I popped the shotgun, and he stopped dead in his tracks. He remained frozen in place until the police arrived to arrest him. Jennifer and the twins would spend the rest of the night at a nearby hotel, but I stayed at home to gather my thoughts. My mind wandered back to that strange voice. Who was it? Where was it coming from? But I was less worried about that than the fact that I was hearing voices at all. After all, only crazy people hear voices, right? Then again, it did save my life as well as my family, but that's just a coincidence. 2 months later, and I had forgotten about the whole thing. I was scheduled for a job interview with a large technical firm, and I was very excited about it because this new job would help me better support my family. I was driving to the company's main building downtown, humming my favorite songs to myself to pass the time. And the voice returned, "Don't go in there." It sounded like a forceful whisper. I turned around and looked in the back seat to see if anyone had somehow managed to sneak into my car, but no one was there. I arrived at the building and got my briefcase out of my car. As I approached the building, the voice spoke again. "Don't go in there." I stopped in the middle of the parking lot. As before, I felt compelled to listen to what the voice was telling me, but this time, I tried to ignore it. As soon as I took one step closer, "Don't go in!" The voice was louder and more insistent. It sounded more clear than it had before. It was definitely female. I stood there for several minutes before, finally throwing my hands up in frustration, I turned around and walked away from the building, and headed toward a bar 2 blocks away. I felt I needed a drink, and badly. Before I could take a sip from my scotch, I heard a very loud explosion. I rushed out of the bar and saw something truly horrifying. The top of the building was burning furiously, and people were running in the streets screaming. Jennifer embraced me tightly when I returned home, relieved that I wasn't hurt. But as for me, my mind was all over the place. That night I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the strange, disembodied female voice that I heard today, and that one night 2 months ago. I was beginning to fear that I was losing my sanity. Suddenly it occurred to me exactly who it sounded like, Vanessa, but it can't be. She's been dead for 6 years. No, I'm going crazy. That's the only explanation. Feeling a need to clear my head, I got up out of bed and went out for a late-night drive. I hadn't been driving 5 minutes when the voice reappeared. "Danger ahead." I ignored it and pressed forward. I was approaching an intersection. There didn't appear to be any other cars on the streets tonight. "Danger ahead." I began driving faster. "Danger ahead!" I entered the intersection, and I heard a loud crash. Next thing I knew, my car was flipping over, and all I could hear was the sound of broken glass and twisted metal. My next memory was of some strange, empty void, although my vision was blurry and I couldn't really make out what it was. The voice spoke once more, but in a calmer and reassuring tone. "Not your time yet. Your family needs you. Farewell. I love you." A bright flash of light, and I woke up in a hospital bed surrounded by friends and family. If you're having a hard time believing this story, I don't blame you. I understand that these accounts sound like the ramblings of a crazy person. But I just can't ignore everything that happened. Remember the dream I mentioned earlier? Was it really just a dream? Or a message from beyond? Am I going insane? Or is my dead girlfriend watching over me from beyond the grave? 5. In 2000, my mother was in a really bad relationship that resulted in us losing our house and having to move into a trailer that my grandfather put a mortgage on his own house, so we would not have to worry about losing another place. The weekend that we were able to move in, my sister and I were given the option of either staying at Grandpa's or going home with her. Whichever choice that we made was final, and we could not change it. I chose to stay with my grandparents because that was what I usually did on the weekends, and my sister chose to go home. During that weekend, she packed up our old house in one day, moved everything on the second, and on the third, she unpacked it all and the entire house was set up and ready to go that night. On the second night, when my mom and sister were spending the first night in the house, they heard someone come up the stairs and ring the doorbell. Being new to the neighborhood, she thought one of the neighbors was coming up to greet her and introduce themselves. But when she opened the door, no one was there. So she thought it was someone pulling a prank on the new person and left it at that. A little while later it happened again, but my sister was the one that opened the door, and again, no one was there. It happened about a half-dozen more times, including my sister just sitting right next to the door to open it immediately to catch the person red-handed. But there was not a single person in sight. So Mom decided to remove the doorbell and bring it inside. It was a wireless one, so she did not have to disconnect any wires. After she did that, they decided to go to bed because they had to get up early to finish getting the house in order, but the doorbell went off a couple more times, even though the button to do so was sitting in front of her, and she knew that no one touched it. So she decided to remove the battery from the bell housing, and as she turned around to go back and lay down, the bell went off one last time, before going silent for the next 20+ years. After she made it so the bell could not be rung anymore, they started hearing footsteps on the roof, so my mom ran out to the front lawn, and there was not a single person on there. but she could audibly hear them going from the front of the house to the back of the house. Every once in a while, you can still hear someone walking on the roof, despite no one being up there. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 262. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do share it around to all your friends and family. It is very much appreciated. Alright, now I'm going to keep the outro fairly short today, as lots of work to do, but we do have a little birthday shout out to do. And the 7th, the 7th. And today's birthday shout out goes to Julie. Julie Reap. I think that's her YouTube name anyway, so I think we're okay there. Julie is 53 years old today, and she almost forgot about her own birthday. I hope whatever you do today, Julie, you're having a great day, and if not, please make time, either over the weekend or whenever your next day off is, to take care of yourself. It's very important to pamper yourself, especially on your birthday. Yeah, we deserve pampering any other day of the year as well, but especially on your birthday. And before we go, I would like to sing happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Julie. Happy birthday to you. Alrighty, I think we're going to wrap things up there for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.